cake had 60 candles on it, and my stepfather was already standing before anyone asked him to. He tapped his fork against his champagne flute twice, and the table went quiet the way tables do when someone with authority clears their throat. 15 people. My mom's closest friends, her sister, her sister's husband, my stepfather's 2 sons from his first marriage, and me. I was sitting at the far end, closest to the kitchen, the way I always ended up at family gatherings. Close enough to help, far enough to be forgotten. Before we sang, my stepfather said, smiling at my mother like she was the only person in the room, "I want to make an announcement on behalf of our family." He let the word "our" sit there a moment. He always did that. Kylie has generously agreed to help her brother get into his first home this spring. She'll be covering the down payment so he can finally get himself established. He lifted his glass toward me. Everyone at the table turned and smiled. My mother dabbed the corner of her eye with a linen napkin. I hadn't agreed to anything. "My name is Kylie Marsh. I'm 32 years old. I'm a senior financial analyst at a logistics firm in Columbus, and I've spent the last 8 years building a life that nobody in my family has ever once asked me to describe. They know I make good money. That's the only detail that ever mattered to them." I sat very still for a moment. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. The woman next to me, one of my mom's friends from her book club, leaned over and whispered, "That's so sweet of you." I smiled at her because I didn't know what else to do with my face. My brother Danny was sitting across the table. He was staring at his water glass. He already knew. I could tell by the way he wasn't looking at me that he'd known for a while. My stepfather was still talking. Something about the housing market, something about families sticking together, something about how proud he was of me for stepping up. I heard it the way you hear television in another room. Familiar sounds without meaning. I picked up my fork. I set it down. I reached for my wine and finished what was in the glass. And then I said quietly to no one in particular, "I didn't agree to that." The woman next to me stopped smiling. My stepfather paused mid-sentence. My mother looked at me the way she's looked at me since I was 9 years old, like I was a problem with legs. "Kylie," she said, just my name, a warning wrapped in 2 syllables. "I'm just clarifying," I said. "I didn't agree to cover anyone's down payment. I don't know where that came from." The silence lasted maybe 4 seconds. Then my stepfather laughed, a short dismissive sound, and said, "We can talk about the details later. Tonight's about your mother." He redirected the table back toward the cake. Someone started singing "Happy Birthday." My mother blew out the candles. I sat there with an empty wine glass and the strange, echoey feeling of watching a version of my life being narrated by someone else. I should explain how we got here because it didn't start that night. It started 8 years ago, when my father died and my mother remarried within 14 months. My stepfather, Ron, came with opinions, a boat he never used, and a son he'd been bailing out since the kid was 17. Danny wasn't Ron's by blood. Danny was mine, same father, 2 years younger. But somewhere in the reconfigured family math that followed my dad's death, Danny and Ron became a unit. 2 people who believed that the world owed them a softer landing than they'd gotten. Danny dropped out of college his junior year, not because he failed out, just because he didn't feel like finishing. He moved back home, then got an apartment my mother paid for, then lost a job at a distribution center, then spent 8 months figuring things out. I paid his car insurance for 2 of those months because my mother called me crying, and I didn't know how to say no to her voice at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday. Then there was the business. A craft brewery he was going to open with a friend. He needed startup capital. My mother asked me if I could help with just a portion. I gave him $4,000. The brewery never opened. The friend disappeared. Danny said it wasn't his fault. There was the medical bill after his emergency appendectomy, which his insurance partially covered and which he partially didn't pay, and which eventually landed in collections, and which my mother told me would ruin his credit for years if someone didn't step in. I stepped in. $2,200. There was a move-in deposit when he relocated to Cincinnati for a job that lasted 3 months, and there was a phone bill he'd somehow gotten into his own personal financial crisis over. And there was the time he asked me to co-sign on a personal loan, and I said yes, because my mother sat across from me at her kitchen table and told me that I was the only person in the family with a real financial future, which I understood was both a compliment and a life sentence. I said yes to all of it, every time, because I told myself it was temporary, because I told myself he'd stabilize, because I told myself that family means something when things get hard. It had been 8 years. He had not stabilized. After my mother's birthday dinner, I drove home on the highway with the radio off. Ron's announcement kept replaying. Kylie has generously agreed. Past tense. Already decided. Already announced. The down payment on a house. I didn't even know what that number was yet, but in Columbus's market, even a modest starter home would require $15,000 to $20,000 minimum at a reasonable percentage. I had savings. They knew I had savings. That had never been a secret I successfully kept. My phone buzzed while I was still on the highway. My mother. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. I let it go again. I got home, fed my cat, poured a glass of water, and sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet because sometimes that's just where I end up when things are too big to sit at a table with. Her voicemail said, "You embarrassed Ron in front of everyone. He was trying to do something nice. Danny needs this, Kylie. You know that. Call me back." I listened to it twice. Then I set my phone face down on the tile. What she meant by nice was this. Ron had decided something without asking me, announced it publicly to make it harder for me to refuse, and framed my compliance as generosity so that any objection I raised would read as selfishness. It was a technique. I'd watched him use it on other people for years. I just hadn't expected it to be used on me in front of a birthday cake. The next morning was a Saturday. I was making coffee when Danny called. He waited until I said hello and then he said, "I know how last night looked." "Do you?" I said. Ron shouldn't have announced it like that. That was his thing, not mine. "Did you know he was going to say it?" A pause, long enough to be its own answer. "I told him I was hoping you'd help," Danny said. "I didn't tell him to make a whole announcement. That's on him." "But you'd already counted on it," I said. "You were already planning around it." "I mean, you've always come through before." I stood at my kitchen counter and looked out the window at the parking lot below my building. A woman was loading groceries into a minivan. A kid was sitting on the curb. Normal Saturday. Regular life continuing outside the walls of whatever was happening inside my head. "That's not a good enough reason," I said. "Kylie?" "I'm not saying no forever," I said, which was partly true and partly a thing I said to get off the phone without a fight. "I'm saying I need time to think. I need you to stop making plans around money you haven't asked me for yet." He said okay. He didn't sound like he meant it. My mother showed up at my apartment that afternoon without texting first. She does this, has always done this. She believes that physical presence is harder to argue with than a phone call, and she's not entirely wrong. She sat down on my couch without being invited to, still in her coat, and looked at me the way she looks at things she doesn't understand and has decided are my fault. "He's 30 years old," she said. "He needs to get out of that apartment. The rent is going up again, and he can't keep throwing money away month after month." "I know," I said, "but that's a problem he needs to solve." "You make 3 times what he makes." "That's not how financial responsibility works, Mom." "He's your brother." "I know he's my brother." "Your father would have wanted." "Please don't," I said. She stopped. She knew that one went too far. She's used it before and it has never worked the way she wants it to, but she keeps trying it like maybe someday it'll land differently. She switched tactics. Told me that Danny had found a house he liked in a neighborhood that was appreciating, that it was a smart investment, that the down payment would essentially be an investment in his future, which was also an investment in the family's stability. She said investment 4 times in 4 sentences. Ron had clearly briefed her. "How much is the down payment?" I asked. $18,000. I nodded slowly. "And you're asking me to give him $18,000? Ron said he'd match 5 if he could cover the rest. So 13,000 from me." She looked at me like I was being difficult for doing arithmetic. "You'd have it back in 2 years, once he's settled and promoted." "He's never paid me back before," I said. "Not once. In 8 years. This is different. It's a house." It's not different, Mom. It's the same thing with a different number on it. She left 40 minutes later, coat still on the whole time, having not touched the tea I made her. At the door she turned and said, almost as an afterthought, Ron is very hurt. He was trying to celebrate something good and you made it into a scene. I closed the door very quietly. It felt important not to slam it. That night I couldn't sleep, not from guilt. I want to be clear about that because I spent a long time confusing guilt with clarity. What was keeping me awake was something colder and more precise. I kept thinking about the loan. 2 years ago, Danny had asked me to co-sign a personal loan. $30,000, he said, for a home renovation business he was starting with a friend of his. I'd asked him questions. He'd had answers. The friend seemed legitimate. The business plan was basic but not insane. I signed. I had not read every line of what I signed. I got up at 2 in the morning, found the documents in the filing cabinet I keep in my closet, and sat at my kitchen table under the overhead light and read them the way I should have read them the first time. The loan was for $30,000. Danny had drawn down the full amount within 60 days of origination. The business had never been formally registered in Ohio. There had been 6 payments made on the loan in the first 8 months. Then the payments stopped. The loan was now 9 months delinquent. My name was on it. I read that line 3 times. My name, cosigner, equally liable for the full outstanding balance plus accumulated interest and fees. I set the papers down on the table. I was not panicking. I want to say that because it surprises me even now. I felt something that was almost the opposite of panic, a kind of absolute stillness, the way a room feels right after a loud sound stops. All this time I thought I was choosing to help. I thought my vulnerability was emotional. I had not understood until that moment that I had also handed them a legal claim. They thought I was sleeping. In fact, I was reading every word I'd been too trusting to read the first time. I didn't call anyone. I didn't text. I sat with it until the sun came up. On Monday I called the family law and financial attorney whose name I found through a coworker who'd used her for a divorce. I explained the situation in a single long paragraph. She listened without interrupting. At the end she said, "Co-signers are fully liable. The lender can come after you for the entire balance if the primary borrower doesn't pay. You need to take action." She walked me through my options. I could contact the lender directly and document my attempt to remedy the delinquency. I could consult with a credit specialist about the impact already showing on my report. She also told me something I hadn't known, that if I could demonstrate the co-signing had been obtained under false pretenses, a business that was never real, documentation that was misleading, I had grounds to pursue legal action against Danny for damages. I didn't make any decisions that day. I just listened. But by the time I got off the phone, something had reorganized itself inside me. Not anger, not even resolve exactly. More like a door that had been stuck for years had finally come off its hinges. I stopped responding to my family's calls and texts. Not blocked. I want to be precise here, just unanswered. I needed to think without their voices in my head, telling me what I owed, what I should feel, who I was supposed to be. I spent those quiet days going through records. I have always been organized with money. It's literally my job, so it didn't take long. I built a spreadsheet. 8 years of transfers, payments, cash given, that's covered. Car insurance, moving deposits, the appendectomy bill, the brewery capital, the phone account, the loan cosign. I listed each one with the date, the amount, and a 1-line description. The total was $61,400, not counting the outstanding loan balance I was now liable for. I stared at that number for a long time, not with grief, though there was some of that, mostly with a strange, reluctant recognition, like finally looking at something you've been deliberately not looking at. The narrative my family had built about me was that I was the strong one, the responsible one, the one who had her life together and therefore had more to give. What that narrative left out was everything I'd said no to myself to keep saying yes to them. The vacation I didn't take the year I paid for Danny's deposit. The home I didn't buy when rates were lower because I was holding capital in case. The relationship that fell apart, partly because my financial entanglement with my family was, according to the man I was seeing at the time, a red flag the size of a billboard. I hadn't added those things to the spreadsheet. Some losses don't have line items. On Thursday, my mother sent a text that said, "Danny found out you haven't confirmed anything. He's devastated. Please just call him." I did not call him. Ron sent a text that said, "I hope you understand the position you're putting this family in." I read it. I put my phone in my desk drawer. On Friday, Danny called 6 times between 7 and 10 at night. The last call was a voicemail. His voice was tight, trying to sound calm and not quite getting there. "I don't know what's going on with you right now, but I have people counting on this. I make commitments based on what you said." He paused. "You said you'd think about it. I just need to know." I hadn't said I'd give him money. I'd said I needed time to think. He had translated that into a commitment. He had made plans around a translation he created himself. I understood, listening to that voicemail, that this was not new behavior. He had been doing this his entire life. When the world didn't give him what he needed, he simply decided it had promised him something, and then felt wronged when the promise wasn't kept. No one had ever let him experience a closed door. I wrote back a single text. "I won't be helping with the down payment. I've also been reviewing the cosign loan from 2022, which is now delinquent. I'll be in touch through my attorney regarding next steps." I sent it at 10:43 on a Friday night. By Saturday morning, the calls had started in earnest. My mother first, crying, then not crying, then angry. "You're threatening your own brother with a lawyer? What is wrong with you? Do you know what this will do to him?" I let her go on. She said I was being dramatic. She said I was being dramatic. She said I was being dramatic. She said I was punishing Danny for something Ron had done. She said that I had always been like this, always found a way to make myself the most important person in the room, always needed everything to be about me. That last one almost got me. Not because it was true, but because I'd heard it so many times that some part of me had started to believe it. "Mom," I said when she stopped for breath, "I co-signed a $30,000 loan that is 9 months delinquent. That is on my credit. That is my legal liability. I am protecting myself." "It'll get sorted out," she said. "Danny just needs time." "He's had 2 years?" "Kylie?" "I have to go," I said, and I hung up. Ron called once. I didn't answer. He left no voicemail. That told me something about the limits of his investment in this situation. Danny called twice more. The second time he left a message that was different from the others. Quieter. He said, "I know I haven't been fair to you. I know that. But I don't know how to fix this without your help. I've never had to figure things out alone. I don't know if I can." I played that message 3 times. I want to be honest, it hurt. Not because it changed anything, but because it was the first real thing he'd said to me in years. Under all the deflection and the entitlement and the borrowed confidence he'd gotten from Ron, there was a 30-year-old man who genuinely didn't know how to stand up without someone underneath him. That wasn't my fault, but it wasn't not my fault either. Every time I'd caught him before he hit the ground, I delayed that reckoning. I hadn't been helping him. I'd been helping him avoid the thing that might have actually helped him. I didn't call back, but I held the phone for a long time after. I met with the attorney twice over the following 2 weeks. She sent a formal letter to Danny through certified mail outlining the delinquent loan situation and my intent to pursue reimbursement for damages. She also helped me formally document my request to the lender that my cosigner status be reviewed. I filed a complaint with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. None of this was fast. None of it felt good. But each step felt like I was drawing a line in a place where no line had ever existed before. My mother stopped calling after the second attorney letter, not because she'd understood, because there was nothing left to demand. The machinery had moved beyond what her phone calls could redirect. I found out through my aunt, her sister, who is kinder than my mother and has always seen things more clearly, that Danny had finally applied for a different housing assistance program he'd been eligible for years, but never bothered pursuing. He'd found a roommate. He was getting a smaller apartment rather than a first home. He wasn't buying a house this spring, but he was, for the first time in his adult life, figuring out an actual plan without a safety net. My aunt said he seemed embarrassed, but okay. I told her I was glad to hear it. She paused and then said, "You know she loves you. She just doesn't know how to show it without needing something from you." I didn't have an answer for that. I've been sitting with it since. In April, I took the vacation I'd canceled the year I paid Danny's deposit. I went to Savannah, which I'd wanted to see for 5 years and kept putting off. I walked along the riverfront at night with a glass of sweet tea, watching the lights on the water, and I felt something I didn't immediately have a name for. It took me most of that first evening to identify it. It was the absence of waiting. I hadn't realized until then how much of my mental space had been occupied by anticipation, waiting for the next call, waiting for the next crisis, waiting to find out what I was about to be asked to give. Even in my quiet moments, there had always been that low background hum of readiness, of being on call for a family that treated my stability like a service they'd subscribed to. In Savannah, it was quiet, not just outside, inside. I called my mother once while I was there. I kept it short. I told her I was traveling. She asked if I was doing okay. I said yes. She said that Danny was adjusting. I said I was glad. There was a pause where, in the old version of our relationship, one of us would have filled the silence with an ask or an obligation, or a guilt-edged reminder of what family means. Neither of us filled it this time. "Take care of yourself," she said finally. "You too," I said. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't the conversation we probably need to have eventually, the one about everything that happened and everything that was asked of me and what family actually means when it costs only one person something. But it was honest, and it was mine. I'd set it on my own terms. From a city I'd chosen, on a trip I'd taken for no reason except that I'd wanted to go. I came home to an apartment that felt different than it had in years, though nothing in it had changed. Same furniture, same cat, same parking lot view from the kitchen window. What was different was the feeling of walking through the door. No dread waiting for me, no voicemails I was afraid to check, no obligation parked in my chest like a car that someone else had left there. My brother sent me a text in May. Short, no preface, no setup. It said, "I know I put you in a bad position. A lot of times. I'm sorry." I read it twice. Then I set my phone down and made dinner and thought about it while I ate. Later I wrote back, "Thank you for saying that. I hope things are going better." It was not a door swinging open, but it was a door that wasn't bolted shut. What happens with it, I don't know. Some things take longer than a spring to work out. Some things need more than an apology and more than an acceptance before they can grow back into something. But I'm not in a hurry anymore. For the first time in 8 years, I have the luxury of not being in a hurry because nothing is on fire, and the fire was never mine to put out. I think about that birthday dinner sometimes. The cake, the candles, my stepfather standing before anyone asked him to. The way everyone smiled at me and waited. How close I came to just nodding, just absorbing it, just paying it the way I had paid everything else and calling it love. What stopped me wasn't anger, it wasn't strategy, it was something simpler and harder to explain. I heard how normal his announcement sounded, how settled, how long it had been settled without me. And I realized I'd been waiting for them to stop asking. I'd been waiting for the dynamic to change, for the day they'd finally see me as a person with limits and not a resource without them. That day was never coming. I was the only one who could make it come. So I did not. I spoke up. Into the candle smoke and the polite smiles and the champagne glasses, I said the small true thing that changed everything. I didn't agree to that. 4 words, present tense, simple sentence. And everything that happened after, the attorney letters, the quiet weeks, the trip to Savannah, the text from my brother in May, all of it started there. Not with a grand gesture, not with a scene, just with telling the truth, calmly, in a room full of people who needed to hear it. I didn't leave my family that night. I left the version of myself who stayed quiet to keep the peace. I haven't missed her once. What I keep coming back to, even now, is how ordinary it felt in the moment before Ron stood up. Candles on a cake, champagne in glasses, 15 people who loved my mother in their own imperfect ways, and then one sentence that rewrote my role in the family as if I'd never had a say in it at all. I used to think that generosity meant saying yes. I gave Danny money for years because I believe that's what good people do. They show up, they cover the gap, they don't make it harder for someone who's already struggling. And there's a version of that instinct that is genuinely decent. Wanting to help the people you love isn't a character flaw. But somewhere along the way, I confused being generous with being available without limit. I confused love with absorption. Every time I stepped in before Danny had to figure something out himself, I wasn't protecting him. I was making it easier for him to stay exactly where he was. That's not kindness. That's something closer to harm wearing a kind face. The cause was always a rescue. The effect, over 8 years, was a 30-year-old man who genuinely didn't know how to stand without someone underneath him. That's what I had to sit with when I finally heard his voicemail, that my choices had consequences too, not just theirs. The cosign loan was the thing that forced me to be honest with myself in a way that guilt and exhaustion never quite managed. When I sat at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning and read every line I should have read 2 years earlier, I wasn't just looking at a delinquent balance. I was looking at proof that I had stopped thinking clearly a long time ago. Smart people do that. They get worn down. They get emotionally leveraged, and eventually they sign things they don't read because the alternative, slowing down, asking questions, saying not yet, feels like cruelty. It isn't. Thinking carefully before you act is not the same as refusing to care. It took me 8 years and a lawyer's phone call to fully understand that distinction. What got me through the hard part, the attorney letters, the silence, the weeks when my mother wasn't speaking to me, wasn't anger. Anger burns too hot and too fast to build anything with. What carried me was something quieter. A kind of steadiness I had to choose deliberately, every single day when it would have been easier to pick up the phone and fix it all with a wire transfer. Choosing not to was the hardest thing I've done. It required me to hold a line that no one else in my family recognized as a line. I'm not the person I was before that birthday dinner. I don't mean that in a dramatic way. I still live in the same apartment. I still have the same job, the same cat, the same parking lot view. But I move through my own life differently now. I make decisions because I've decided, not because someone announced them on my behalf. I help people when I choose to, which means the help is real rather than extracted. Denny's text in May. Short, no preface, just, I know I put you in a bad position. I'm sorry. Stayed with me longer than anything else from that whole year. Not because it resolved anything, but because it was the first time he'd said something true to me in a very long time. Maybe the closed door taught him something that the open one never could. I don't know yet. Some things take longer than a season to show themselves. What I know is this: the people who love you clearly will make room for your limits. And the ones who can only love you when you're useful, that's not love you lose when you walk away. That's a weight you finally put down.